Father Dominic, I'd like to ask you now, please, to say a prayer so we can begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neville. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. Isn't it wonderful that we're actually coming back in person? So we're going to start with the prayer for persecuted Christians. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father in heaven, you make your sun shine on good and bad alike. Your Son, Jesus Christ, died for us all, and in his glorious resurrection, he still retains the 5 wounds of his passion. With his divine power, he now sustains all those who suffer persecution and martyrdom for the sake of their fidelity to the faith of the Church. May persecuted Christians around the world remain like Mary, their mother, together at the foot of the cross of Christ the martyr. Comfort those menaced by violence and those oppressed by uncertainty. May your Holy Spirit of love make fruitful the witness and the blood of those who die for giving. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Just briefly to give you the running order, and we will finish within the hour, but there'll be refreshments afterwards and a chance to buy items if you haven't already had a chance. So we'll hear from John in a moment with the report launch. I think you've all got copies in your places. This very powerful report. This morning, just at lunchtime, Fiona Bruce, Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Religious Freedom, said she's read many reports, but she said she read this over the weekend and she was in tears. And I think anyone who reads it will be deeply moved by the report put together by John Pontifex and John Newton, working with others in different organisations as well. And we're very grateful, John, for all your hard work and that of your team, Finn, as well. And my thanks especially to Bryony for helping organise tonight, and Patricia and Colette and Kerry here tonight as well, for everyone at ACN, all the staff who've been helping set up for today. So we'll hear from John, then we'll see a video testimony, which will be very powerful indeed. I'll let John introduce that. And then we're delighted to have Professor Michelle Clark with us. Professor Clark is a former professor in the International Affairs Department at the George Washington University in the USA. She's co-authored with Coptic human rights activist Nadia Ghali the only 2 reports that include the field research on the abduction of Coptic Christian girls in Egypt. She has spoken directly with victims as part of the research. And we'll then see a video which you'll hear more about, a very moving video of Niha, which I showed earlier today in the Houses of Parliament, which members of Parliament and those present were moved by. And then we'll hear from Father Michael Nazar Ali. And Michael and I go back quite a long way. When, I can't say my former incarnation, but when I was an Anglican priest many years ago, I was a curate in Littlemore. I don't know, I was thinking about it the other day, daring to preach from the pulpit Newman preached from. I hope in heaven his ears were closed. But one day we had a much better preacher than me turn up, and it was Michael. It was down in, I'm not sure which parish you were in those days. Were you already Bishop of Rochester? St. Margaret's, right. And he came to preach. It was a wonderful homily. And dear Bishop Michael and I have been friends over many years. And it was a privilege to be at his ordination as a Catholic priest the other day. I think when you gave me a blessing, we were both in tears, actually, thinking about the roots in life one makes and God's calling. Michael, as you might well know, was the 106th Bishop of Rochester in the Church of England from 1994 to 2009. Born in Karachi, he was the first diocesan bishop in the Church of England born abroad. And now he's part of the Ordinariate Rite, and he directs a very important Oxford Centre for Training, Research, Advocacy and Dialogue, and we've been delighted to work with him with meetings with the Pakistani High Commission and so on in the past, so we worked very closely with you. So Father Michael, thank you very much for being with us. So without any more of ado from me, I will ask John to come and launch the report. Thank you very much for being with us. John, please.
Thank you very much, Neville. In countries marked by persecution, young girls and women live under the shadow of a form of violence and oppression that for far too long has been hidden from view. Every day, and I do not exaggerate, girls and women go about their lives with the threat of being kidnapped, forcibly converted, and forcibly married. Many are targeted for sexual violence. And at Aid to the Church in Need, barely 24 hours go by without us at ACN receiving a fresh report of a young Christian somewhere in the world facing this particular atrocity. Last week, for example, we had a report of this involving a 3-year-old girl. Yes, I did say 3 years of age. And it's because of reports such as this that Neville Kirk-Smith asked the Press and Information Department, which I head, to prepare a special report looking at this critical aspect of persecution today. And I'd like at this point to thank my colleagues John Newton and Finn Shiner for their incredible work in bringing this report to life. Well, we went about our research drawing on live cases. And each day I am in touch with a young girl called Mara Shabazz. Well, many of you here will perhaps know the story of Mara. She was abducted, aged just 14, just as lockdown was beginning, the COVID crisis. Mara is a Catholic girl from Pakistan, from near Faisalabad, and having been abducted at gunpoint, the reports tell us that she was drugged, she was raped, and she was forcibly converted and forcibly abducted to her abductor. When Mara eventually escaped, which she eventually did as a result of running away from the man's house, her abductor accused her of apostasy. And ever since, for more than 40 months now, she has been living in hiding, living in just one room and unable to leave. She is at least surrounded by members of her family. They're all there together, sleeping pretty much on the floor, with very little to call their own, and certainly no chance of getting out. Such are the threats that exist. But we are fighting for her to be given asylum. The threats we understand to be very real, and they're not going away. And that's why I'd like to reiterate the thanks of all of us at Aid to the Church in Need for the many of you here who I'm sure signed the petition calling on Boris Johnson to provide UK asylum for Mara and her family. We had 12,500 people sign that petition. We've had 2 meetings with Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, and we are still hopeful of a positive outcome. But Mara's case, as covered in the report, is by no means the only one of its kind. Also from Pakistan is the case of 12-year-old Farah Shaheen, whose kidnapper tethered her to a rope and shackled her ankles. In Egypt, we heard of the case of Rania Abd al-Masih, a 39-year-old devout Coptic Christian woman, forced into a car by 2 women. She suffered 3 months of sexual and psychological torture before she finally was set free, following huge pressure from the local Christian community. And from Iraq, you'll see in the report the case of Rita Habib, a Christian from Iraq who was abducted by extremists, repeatedly sold and resold, and trafficked and raped, married and remarried. The report in which these accounts are told, Hear Her Cries, is very much the first of its kind from Aid to the Church in Need. And while the report focuses very much on the plight of Christian women, we are very conscious too of how other faith minorities have suffered in this respect. I'm not thinking only here of the Yazidi women and girls from Iraq who were kidnapped and suffered terrible abuse at the hands of Daesh, but also Hindu girls and women in Pakistan, and many, many others from different faith communities who suffer in terrible, terrible ways in different contexts, in different places around the world. Inevitably, this report tackles material which is very difficult to get to the bottom of. Again and again, the difficulty of getting a fully complete amount of data has been very much manifest. And there are good reasons for this. Girls, women, and their families are often just too afraid to report what's happened to them. There's fear, there's social shame, and there's also the very real threat of retribution from their abductor. And this means that the full scale of this crisis is largely unknown. And while that may be the case, we have enough data in this report to be able to indicate that the phenomenon of Christian and other faith minority girls and women suffering abduction, forced conversion, and forced marriage, sexual violence, is sufficient for it to be described as a human rights catastrophe. We know, for example, that in Nigeria, the research indicates that Christians make up 95% of women and girls held by Islamist extremists. In Pakistan, we have reports that every year up to 1,000 Christian and Hindu girls and young women are abducted, and many of them forced to convert. And we also know that in some countries, the rate of abduction and the rate of forced conversion is so high that it can be described as constituting potential genocide. There are 5 tests of genocide as defined by the UN Convention on the Prevention of Genocide, and one of them is efforts to eradicate the possibility of a new generation being born within that community. Well, in some cases, the degree to which this is happening is such that you can see how a genocide of this nature can indeed be described as having taken place. And it's clear that at Aid to the Church in Need, it's not sufficient just to simply give the information. To learn about this is to have the moral responsibility to act. And that's why we are calling as a charity on the UN and the UK to take more steps to bring an end to this horrible cycle of forced abduction, forced conversion, forced marriage, and sexual violence. It just should not be happening in our age in particular. So I thank all of those of you who signed our petition, calling for this to take place, calling for the UN and the UK to take the appropriate action. And we have been blocked in our efforts by Facebook to promote our petition on grounds that our campaign was emphasized the Christian dimension to this problem. So all the more reason why we call on you tonight to sign our petition, acnuk.org/petition. Please sign our petition. Fiona Bruce, who Neville mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for religious freedom or belief, has agreed to receive that petition on behalf of the UK government. And it's only by taking action like that that we can begin to see meaningful change. So, as I come to an end, let me go back to the case of Mara Shabazz, which I know many of you have been so committed to following. Almost every day I'm in touch with her and members of her family. Her messages to me are very simple. Her English is broken and very fragmentary in places. And so her messages simply say things like, just please pray for me. Please be there for us. And obviously these threats continue. And at one point I received a message from her and she said, "John, we are very worried. We trust in God, but in this world, who can we turn to but you?" Well, thanks to the likes of you here, we can report back to Mara that she is not alone, that we are united in standing up for her and giving her a voice. And so I invite you, please, to take your copy of Hear Her Cries, to share this information with your own communities, and to continue to be a mouthpiece that's inspired by prayer and leads directly to action. And it's with that in mind that we can now turn to a short video which provides a brief summary of the findings of the Hear Her Cries report. So we'll now turn to that, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Around the world, Christian women and girls are being kidnapped and forced to abandon their faith before being sexually abused, often under the outward show of marriage. Aid to the Church in Need's Hear Her Cries report reveals a catalogue of horrors suffered by women who are vulnerable, both because of their sex and because of their faith. Victims often remain silent, fearing social shame or threats from their abductors. In other cases, authorities, including police, enforce silence. In Pakistan, Christians could comprise up to 70% of minority faith girls and women forcibly converted and married every year. And in Nigeria, Christians could make up to 95% of women and girls being held by extremists. In conflict situations, such as the Islamist insurgencies in the Middle East and parts of Africa, minority women suffer higher rates of sexual exploitation. The attacks on Christian women in countries like Mozambique, Nigeria, Iraq and Syria can be regarded as genocidal. These are designed to destroy the local Christian community. Similar motives apparently underlie cases of kidnapping in Egypt. A former kidnapper said girls are groomed or abducted and passed to hardline Salafist groups who force them to convert. And, as Aid to the Church in Need's Hear Her Cries report illustrates, each of these tragedies has a human face. Myra was walking near her home in Medina town, Pakistan, when she was dragged into a car. Her abductors raped her, recording the incident on video, and blackmailed her into signing papers saying she had converted to Islam and married her abductor. Myra managed to escape, but her abductor and his supporters called on her to be killed for apostasy. After being seized in northeast Nigeria, Rebecca was forced to marry a Boko Haram fighter. She was beaten ruthlessly for refusing to sleep with him, flogged with 98 strokes every day, made to dig a hole for 3 weeks, and interred in a pit for 4 days. He finally forced himself upon her, but she managed to escape, walking over 3 weeks to find freedom. Today, Rebecca is being supported by the church in a project backed by Aid to the Church in Need. And these are not isolated examples. We need to act for the sake of girls and women like Myra and Rebecca. We need to help those persecuted for their faith and sexually targeted because of their gender. We need to champion their cause. We need to hear their cries.
We'd like to follow that with a video testimony for our friend Father Gideon from Nigeria about Rebecca. And this video, again, I think you'll find very moving. Thank you.
When they came into Baga in the evening, they started shooting sporadically. So they came, and when I saw that, I asked my husband to run away because they were after capturing men. When he ran away, they came and picked my children and picked me away as well.
Arrived at the camp, they forced each one of us to have a husband. But I told them that I'm a Christian and I'm already married to another man. But they said my husband is an infidel and he will not lead me to paradise. Therefore, they forced me to take one of the men there, and they tortured me. When I saw that I was suffering so much, I decided to keep myself away. However, because of the way they forced me, I took in for the man, became pregnant, and I delivered a child that was his own. I refused to marry him, and because of my refusal, they took one of my children, threw him into a small lake, took one of the other child and sold him out into slavery, and by that then they forced me to marry him.
They made me to suffer and do all forms of civil work. I did all domestic work like cleaning their houses, washing plates, washing their clothes, and yet I could not even be allowed to feed and eat because I was a Christian. They suffered me and tortured me a lot.
I refused to marry him. They therefore forced me and tortured me, put me in a prison, and discovered I was still not willing to give up. They also put me in another underground prison. Oftentimes they will beat me and make me do some work, domestic work in the house, like cleaning and fetching water. And that was how I continued. But with the help of God, I continued to endure and hold on to my resolve not to marry him. It was in the evening when they were praying, having their evening prayer. While they were having evening prayer, I gathered my children to myself, picked them. That day, the military came also to attack the camp. When I heard of the attack, I took a different direction and began running. As I ran, I came into a community, a Fulani community, and they too were scared and thought that I had come as a suicide bomber to kill them. But I had explained to them that no, I too have been a victim, a kidnapped person abducted by Boko Haram. They asked about me and my children, and I explained to them. Thereupon, they asked me to follow a different direction because they had earlier on attacked one of the communities close to them. When I ran away, I came to a small stream. When I was about to cross, it was very difficult for me to cross. And a man saw me trying to cross, and he told me how dangerous it was to cross. I had wanted to leave the Boko Haram child I had, which is Chris. However, the man that saw me asked me what was I doing, and my child also asked me to pick the other child and continue. I had explained to him that it is not my child, it is a result of a union with Boko Haram. He asked me, since it is your child, carry him. In that way, I felt the compassion as a mother, picked the child and crossed the stream, and then came across into Niger, where the process of my reunification with the family began. After my escape, I was eventually brought into Nigeria by the soldiers. The soldiers thought too I was one of the wives of Boko Haram. But I explained to them that I was abducted and I had lived and even had a child for one of them. They then tried tracing to know where my husband was. They found a community where he was living and brought me through Damaturu into Maiduguri. And there they asked my husband, they identified him and brought him to me and asked him to identify me. He said, yes, I was his wife. They asked him, would he want to marry me? He said, yes, I would marry her. She's my wife. I would take her back. So he took me back with the children. And when he took me with the children, I was under his care. Unfortunately, we fell ill with the kids, but we were treated and the process of my healing began. And from there, then we said we wanted a house of our own, and we found a house where we are now staying. Because of what has happened to me while I was in captivity, I had suffered a lot. But oftentimes in the sessions I attend, they will tell me, I'm even lucky that I survived this. And they try to help me to understand my own pain and try to see how I can overcome it. And once more, I appreciate the help that those people gave me, because what they did to me has helped me to set up a shop, to start a new life, and to move with my own life onward. But I must be grateful to ACN for what they have done, because they have really helped me. And this awareness they are creating is very important, because it will save a lot of young women. That women are abducted and taken into captivity is a thing of pity and very painful, because they suffer a lot. And so ACN, by creating this awareness, is doing so great, and is trying to bring healing and stop and prevent all these forms of abduction. And so I'm grateful to them, and I ask that the Lord will continue to bless them. This effort by ACN to bring an end to abduction and all forms of forced marriage is a very good thing, especially the leaders among them and other world leaders who are struggling to end this abduction. I am happy to hear that they are making this effort, and I will continue to be grateful to ACN for what they do. I am very grateful, and I hope that these bad practices, this forced abduction, this torture of women will someday come to an end.
I think one thing we learnt during lockdown is how much more we can use videos and WhatsApps, and we used to bring, and we still will when we can, speakers here, and I'm sure those of you will remember Asia Bibi's family coming as well, and we've had some moving speakers over the years. But even for our projects, we were doing a lot by WhatsApp, even looking at projects, discussing, and now able to visit again and meet with people. But we bring you these testimonies, and we do that because we know that you will hold these people in your hearts and in your prayers. We're absolutely delighted to have Professor Michelle Clarke with us, and I've already given us a mini bio on her as retired Professor of International Affairs at George Washington University. She's now going to speak to us for 10 minutes. It should be longer, but we're not going to keep people more tonight. Speak on the traumatic situation faced by young Christian women in Egypt and around the world. Michelle, thank you for making the effort to come over and be with us.
Thank you all for being here to hear about this very, very important issue. Thank you to Aid to the Church in Need, Neville, John Pontifex, John Newton, for inviting me here, for all the wonderful staff who welcomed my husband and I so warmly, and for the marvelous report that has just been released. I was able to read it cover to cover and was very moved by it. Permit me a very brief, slightly personal story, but I feel within the family of faith that this is very appropriate. When my husband and I first arrived in London, we were here on a Sunday morning, and I thought we should go to church. So with the advice of some people we knew, we found one, which ended up being a little bit more contemporary than I had anticipated, but nonetheless marvelous. And at the end, they invited people in the congregation to come forth for prayer. They announced it was the first time since COVID that they were actually meeting for prayer in the front of a church, and there was just great excitement among the congregants because they could go and pray together and be together. And as I saw everyone come forward, I started to get some tears in my eyes, and I thought, wow, everyone really needs God. And the more they came, the harder I began to cry. And I realized how much I need God. I need God, I've needed God all of my life for guidance and for strength. And I think for many of us here, we need God to help guide us towards purpose. What do we do with the talents, the resources, the time that we have? I really believe that in this work, I found my way to this as a mission, in a sense, as I thought, how can I use the analytical abilities that somehow I possess, and what can I do with it? And I was very honored when I was invited here, because the work among the Coptic Christians is among my human rights work that I feel the most grateful for and the most gratified by. I come here now so thank you for listening to a bit about me. I'm here as a witness to tell you that, in fact, all that you have read or will read, all that you have seen and will see, all that you have heard and will hear is all true. I have traveled to Egypt and met with the young women who have been abducted and who somehow have managed to return home, or who have escaped a kidnapping attempt and live in hiding. Or I've met with family members of daughters who have never returned home and from whom they've never heard, not knowing whether they are alive or dead. In my own country, the United States, I meet with young women who seek asylum based on the fear of abductions and forced conversions. I'm delighted to report that my government is granting these requests for asylum because they know through research, through testimony, through the grace of God, that these requests, that those fears are based on fact. As a former diplomat and academic, I'm also here as a little bit of an analyst to help us unravel the layers of the complexity of the problem, perhaps to help sort out the complexity of emotions elicited by the films we hear and the talks that we listen to, and perhaps even find a glimmer of light to guide the way forward. So now I'll ask you to imagine for a moment. First of all, some of you are fathers, others imagine. A Father George gets a phone call from a stranger who threatens, "Watch out for your daughter," and hangs up the phone. The father saves the telephone number and he goes to the local police, who discard his complaint. It's a joke, they say. But George knows it's not. Why? Because he's heard rumblings in his community of threats and menaces and even disappearances of other young Coptic women. So George takes off work for 2 weeks to guard his daughter. Nothing happens. He has to go back to work, and he tells his wife, "Don't let her out of your sight." But the daughter wants to go out. She's a teenager. She wants to run to the supermarket and across the street and get something to drink. So when the mother's back is turned, she does. And she never returns. George returns to the police. This time, he's been able to track down and identify the name of the man who called him with that threatening message. And again, his complaints are ignored. It's probably a boyfriend, he's told, and he's never heard from his daughter again. Imagine this time that you're a mother with a younger daughter, a daughter in her 30s, and you are about to be hospitalized in Cairo, so you want your daughter, the daughter Nadia, to come and help you. Nadia gets on a train with her 2 children. She calls her mother to confirm the arrival time, and this is the last time that Fakia, the mother, hears from Nadia. A woman of means, Fakia has spent considerable time and resources looking for Nadia. Eventually, she receives a call from a man who tells her to call someone else, and so Fakia does. A man answers and tells her, "I have your daughter. She is with me. You will never see her again." Finally, Fakia was able to locate a photo of her daughter on a website for newly converted Muslims and track down a YouTube clip of her daughter and grandchildren announcing their conversion to Islam. The authorities chose not to investigate. And finally, imagine a young woman, and we'll call her Helen. Her father dies when she is 16, and she drops out of school. Her home life deteriorates. She becomes friends with a Muslim girl, and she frequently spends time at home. She frequently spends time with a young Muslim friend and visits her home. The brother, who has seen her, admires her, tries to flirt with her. Subsequently, on an afternoon when it appears that everyone all of a sudden has disappeared, rapes her, subsequently stalks her, and threatens her and her family unless she marries him. So Helen does. She believes she has no choice. She converts to Islam, moves into her husband's home, and there she is psychologically and physically abused. But because she's feisty and a troublemaker and doesn't go gently into this horrible life, the family finally lets her return home, which is not uncommon because she is never able to regain her Christian identity. She will forever hold Muslim identity card, will never get a divorce, will therefore never be able to marry a Christian man, never bear Christian children. If she does have children, they will be considered Muslim. She wants a divorce. She wants her identity restored. The government is ignoring her lawyer's requests. So these are 3 stories among the hundreds I have heard, and none of them are imaginary. Several questions emerge when we hear these. Why didn't the authorities follow up? And an even more pressing question, is there anything anyone can do? Is there anything we can do? So I'd like to highlight a few areas that are important for advocates and allies of this cause. And if it seems a little bit precise or analytical, it's because that's who I am. The first is to understand the nature of the problem itself. John Pontifex in his report makes it very clear that what we are looking at are not just random acts, but we're looking at strategic, targeted efforts. And I was so grateful that he used this word, targeted. These are not misguided romances. These are not gestures of teenage defiance or rebellion. These are not love affairs gone wrong. We are talking here about strategic and targeted efforts to erode minority Christian communities by attacking women. This is a war of attrition against Christians using women as the primary scapegoats. Our stories show victims from diverse economic and social backgrounds and geographical location. What they have in common is they are Christians and they are girls and women. As with any planned offense, proven tactics are used to obtain the ends. 3 most common tactics have to do with force, or fraud, or coercion. The idea of consent or choice is completely separate from anything that we are talking about here. Fraud and deception are frequent tactics that are often used to convince a young girl to enter into romantic relationship with a Muslim man. And while many young girls around the world do show poor judgment in their choice of boyfriends, the seduction of a vulnerable young woman by a predator is a recognized form of recruitment in human trafficking, and certainly coming from expertise in combating human trafficking, I've seen this over and over again, and I see how it's translated here. It is not to be dismissed by someone saying, oh, she's just a girl who fell in love with a guy. An example of force is quite prevalent. Just think about what it requires to abduct someone. It's very hard to decide randomly, oh, I'll just kidnap a person in living daylight. When you hear stories or have watched YouTube videos of abductions of Christian women that take place in broad daylight, you don't see just small cars incidentally pick up with very intense struggles to throw a woman over a back seat. You see very sleek vans with darkened windows and side doors that can open and allow a person to be thrown in. Women's paths and schedule to and from work, market, home, school have been studied. People have been targeted, stalked, and the precise pickup point, this precise time of day has been identified as strategic. Drugs are frequently used to ensure compliance and are slipped into drinks offered in social events in order to abduct a woman or to create a barely lucid state which allows for the performance of a conversion or a marriage that is not based on consent. During my research, I also noted the emergence of another tactic which John mentioned tonight, which is the increase of abductions of young mothers with children. Once the mother is converted, the children are automatically considered to be Muslim, even if the mother herself is able at a future date, not very likely, but it could happen, to reinstate her own Christian identity. Second, it's very important, so we understand now there are tactics, there are strategies, there's a methodology to this. The second is that it's very real and that it's not going away. In fact, this challenge that we are talking about is increasing. We know that the abductions, forced marriages, but how do we know this? Okay, that's an important question. We know that it goes around the globe and it's increasing. I was so excited to see the Church and the Aid to the Church in Needs report, Hear Her Cry. It contributes so much to confirming this. When I wrote my 2 reports several years ago on the abduction, forced marriage, forced conversion of Coptic women, no one was writing reports like this, and you think, well, am I speaking into a vacuum? I knew I wasn't, but you somehow feel that it is. You feel that you are. So what ANC has been able to do by highlighting instances of abuse in 3 significant areas of the world is confirmed that this is truly a global problem. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. This is one of your very, very great contributions, in the particular report. Other sources provide us with evidence of growth of the problem. As we follow breadcrumbs as we look for ways out. In Egypt, human rights lawyers have reported increases in the numbers of women who petition the government to have their Christian religion reinstated after being forced to convert to Islam. It is my experience, that the personal experience, as I mentioned briefly earlier, that the numbers of Coptic women who are applying for and being granted asylum in the United States on the basis of fear of abductions is increasing. One of our newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, actually wrote a lot about this not too terribly long ago. The stories of these women document systematic stalking, bullying, and acts of violence, which parallels the stories of the women I and ACN have documented. So it's organized, it's growing, and it's becoming more visible. And this also is an area that as advocates, as strategists, as policymakers, as people who pray, can also think about. Social media and technology is something that can be used in both ways. In Egypt, Coptic advocacy groups have been developing websites where activists post notices and updates of abductions. Egyptian websites post videos and images of new converts to Islam. I gather, John, that you were dependent on many of these reports, social media reports, as you all compiled your report. This is certainly valid evidence. Someone today following a meeting wrote into a chat asking question, what evidence do you have? Interesting piece of evidence I've alluded to in one of my early stories is what the information of, and we shouldn't be surprised, that we obtain through cell phones. And when the father, George, received a telephone call, he kept the number, he was able to identify the name of the caller. When another father received threatening telephone calls, he managed to press the record button. This information is taken to authorities. The authorities choose to ignore it. They are choosing to ignore real evidence that their own technology, the technology we all use, is giving them. They're not choosing to dismiss stories. They are dismissing concrete evidence. Evidence about these abductions, about this treatment exists. What can we do to harness this type of evidence? And so our challenges as advocates, as people who pray, as people who want to help, is to understand how can we use what we know to intervene in the ways that we can. I'm very grateful for the Aid to the Church in Need for intervening in such a powerful way. Thank you.
So we're going to turn next to a piece of witness testimony, this time from Pakistan. So I'd like to welcome to the stage, if I may, Amir, if he's able to come to the stage, because without Amir, this particular testimony, we just wouldn't have been able to get it. So it's a way of saying thank you to him and his great work that we're able just to say a few words to introduce the Amir film, the Neha film. So over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for sparing some time tonight to come here and attend this very moving event and show your solidarity to the persecuted church. In Pakistan, a number of girls become victim, if not every day, maybe every other day, of this horrible crime. Many cases go unreported, and there are only a few who come to light. The video we are going to see now here, it's of a young girl who was only 13 or 14 when she was kidnapped. She was forced to marry a man, and then she was converted. But some people, I would like to mention an activist in Karachi, Pakistan, who rescued this young girl, and now this girl lives in hiding, and we are going to listen to the story of this very young girl who are like many others, those cases which are not reported at all. I would also like to thank ACN and John Pontifex for this opportunity to be part of this event tonight and to put this video together with my friend from Karachi, Pakistan, Ghazala Shafiq, who is doing a great work for these young girls there. So again, thank you very much for being here tonight and showing solidarity to these young girls. Thank you.
I'm Pastor Ghazala Shafiq. I'm also working as a human rights activist. I'm here with a young Christian girl who is a victim of forced conversion and forced marriage. Her name is Neha Parvez. One evening, Neha, aged 13, and her family received a visit from her aunt named Sundas. Her aunt asked permission from her mother to take Neha with her to visit her sick son in the hospital, which was actually a lie. She never wanted to take Neha to the hospital. Instead, she was conspiring with her brother, 30 years older than Neha, to get Neha married to him. Sundas and Imran both are Muslims. When Neha's mother granted leave to go with the Aunt Sundas to visit the sick son, when she was going, the aunt took Neha's younger brother Haris also with them. Haris is only 2 years old. She never took her to the hospital. Instead, she was taken to a flat. So I asked Neha what happened when she reached to the flat. When they reached to the flat instead of hospital, she was told that you are getting married to Imran. Remember, Imran is 30 years older than Neha. When she refused that I'm a small girl, I'm a young girl, I don't want to get married. They snatched her brother from her, they beat her and then they locked her in a room. Then Imran came inside the room and he sexually assaulted her, raped her many times and then left her locked in the room and he went outside. So she stayed there overnight and next morning they took her to an unknown place along with her brother. And there they told her, if you try to talk to anybody or you try to tell your story to anybody, we will kill your brother. So there they gave her some papers to put her signature on those papers. When she wrote her name, Neha Parvez, she was told, no, you are not Neha, you are now Fatma. You are now married, you are a Muslim now, and your age is also 18 years, you are 18 years old. And then they brought her back home. She was locked in the room again, but her brother was sent home back to the mother. And she was kept locked inside the room. She was kept locked in a room. Imran was repeatedly assaulting her, raping her every day. And Imran had a daughter same age as of Neha. She was coming, bringing meals to her 3 times a day, and Mehak saw Neha crying. Mehak felt the pain of Neha, and one day she helped her to escape from there. She gave her money, she gave her the long veil so she can hide herself, and she ran away or she escaped from that place. Neha was there for almost 6 days. When she got escaped, she reached her home. She told the family that what has happened to her. The family took her to the police station, but police officers refused to help her or the family to report her case. That was the time when I got involved as a human rights activist. I worked for the rights of Christian girls and I work for the women empowerment here in Pakistan, especially in Karachi. So I helped Neha to get her case registered. It's been 3 years, still litigation is going on. The problem is this, that here the multiple litigation takes place. Instead of all this, Neha is still a wife to Imran. We have filed a case of jacketation or dissolving the marriage. Neha is facing a lot of threats. She has been attacked so many times. She is living a life in hiding. Whenever she goes to court, she has a threat to her life. I asked Neha, when her life is under threat, why she's telling her story to the world. She's saying it is very painful. I have lost everything. I have lost my family. I have lost my education. I'm living in a hiding. I cannot move freely. I cannot go out. Everything has been taken away from me. So I want the world to know my pain, that no other girl should suffer like me as Neha has suffered. I asked Neha what she wants from the church or from the people to do for her. She wants the church should pray for her. She needs to get her education restarted. She needs to get her reunited with the family. She needs to move freely. She needs all this litigation to get over so she can live an independent and free life. She says it is very painful. No other girl should suffer like this. She wants justice. She wants the world should ask the Pakistani government, please save minority girls. No girl should suffer like Neha has suffered.
Thank you so much for all your help with that very, very important video, which I was telling you was received in the Houses of Parliament today and moved many of the ministers and others who were there, and so important. Bishop Michael, Father Michael, I would like you to follow on, if you could, on that in the way you can, and thank you so much. It's a joy to work with you, and it's wonderful to have you here this evening. Father Michael, thank you.
Well, I mean, it is wonderful that you've been able to arrange this event and this report. It's very impressive, the work that ACN does. I've been with them in Iraq. I've been with them in advocacy for the situation in Pakistan, and I hope that our partnership grows. I was so struck by Professor Clark asking us to put prayer at the center. And I think that is very important, because whatever else we do, I think as people of faith, we should put our trust in praying. And God moves in marvelous ways His wonders to perform. At the altar, I was given the wrong Eucharistic prayer. It was a commemoration of Bishop Alan Williams. And so I had to make up a prayer for the persecuted church and commemoration of martyrs, and I hope that as Father Dominic was celebrating, that prayer has ascended to heaven, to the presence of God Himself. Now, so much has been said, I don't wish to repeat any of it. So much of it has been so moving. But one or two things to draw out, the lessons to be drawn out from what has been said. The first thing is that these girls, in whichever country, are marginalized. They are from a marginalized community, and they are the marginalized of the marginalized, if you see what I mean. This is very important in making the kind of abduction possible, even. They are from a community that's marginalized, that's poor, that's politically on the sidelines, and that's actively discriminated against, whether socially or even legally, as we've heard from Professor Clark in so many ways. And this marginalization then leads to impunity. So the people who kidnap, the people who force these girls, know that nothing's going to happen to them because they're doing these things. Impunity in the majority community, very often it is the majority community, is an essential feature, I think, of what is going on, not just in Pakistan, but also in the other countries that we have talked about. The question of force and the order in which things happen. So there is first the forced conversion to Islam. And the reason for that is that once you convert someone to Islam, they then come under the purview of Sharia law. The marriage then takes place, the nikah, under Sharia law. And so then any kind of legal remedy, if any, has to be found under Sharia law. And this becomes a catch-22 situation. So the parliament in Pakistan, to give it credit, passed a law with considerable support, equalizing the minimum age for marriage between men and women. So in the past, the statutory age for men was 18 and for women it was 16, but Parliament passed a law equalizing this age. But there was such a furious reaction from the Islamist parties that the government has never been able to implement this change. The argument is that under Sharia, the age for marriage is puberty. So as soon as a girl has had her first period, she is eligible for marriage. Well, I mean, we all know what that means. The Provincial Assembly in the Sindh then passed a law, unanimously I believe, prescribing a minimum age for conversion to Islam. Again, there was such a furious reaction, people saying that there can be no minimum age for conversion to Islam. And even those jurists, and there were some eminent judges who said, well, okay, there may not be a minimum age for conversion, but there can be a minimum age for the legal recognition of conversion. Yeah, I mean, we may think it's that's nuance, how many angels on the point of a pin kind of argument, but sometimes these arguments are necessary, but even that was not acceptable to the extremists. So you've got a situation where there's no minimum age for conversion, so a girl can be as young as you like to be forced to convert. There's no minimum age for marriage, so she can be as young as you like to be married. So how do you get out of this situation? What to do? In my article in the Telegraph this morning, I have suggested a number of steps that can be taken. First of all, there should be pressure on the United Nations to add forced conversion and marriage to the UN's list of crimes of violence against women. This should be possible to do. And it would be a worthy addition to that list. I mean, some other claimed additions are not as worthy as this might be. Secondly, the British government, our own government, is involved in aid programs in many of these countries, including Pakistan, to enhance the participation of women in society, in education, for instance, and so on. Such programs should directly address, and I mean, this may be something to take up with Fiona Bruce, who is a friend in every way. Such programs should directly address violence against women and specifically abduction and forced marriage. This is not impossible for the government to do now that the Foreign Office also has responsibility for development and for aid. These two things should come together. We need a Bill of Rights. I mean, certainly in Pakistan, also in Egypt, although the new Egyptian constitution does have a kind of Bill of Rights, but we need a Bill of Rights which ensures equal treatment of all citizens. That's the basic thing. No discrimination on grounds of religion. Emancipation of religious minorities from crippling legislation. I mean, in Pakistan, obviously, it's the blasphemy law. In Egypt, it is the difficulty in having your identity changed if you find yourself in a situation, as Professor Clark has just said. And in Nigeria, it is the courts enforcing Sharia rather than statutory Nigerian law. So a Bill of Rights which would give women equality under the law. Now, I'm so delighted that Aid to the Church in Need has become an advocate for these women. But I think we need to move one step further, and that is to provide legal aid for them. Maybe that is happening already, but I understand that some of these young women, girls, and their families need assistance with even getting to the courts, even seeking legal redress. I also understand, this may not be the case with what we've seen, but some of the girls involved are isolated from the Christian community and from the churches. I think it is very important to encourage families and these young girls to be integrated into church, so that if something does happen to them, the community can support them. And finally, one of the things we need again is trauma counseling for these girls, because they've been through the kind of experience we cannot even imagine, and they will need for the foreseeable future some counseling to come to terms with what has happened to them. Of course, asylum is a way for some people. But again, we don't want to give in to the extremist intention that these countries should be cleansed of Christians. We didn't do that in Iraq. We shouldn't do it in Pakistan. We shouldn't do it in Egypt. We should try and maintain a robust and faithful Christian presence in these places, including northern Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Father Michael, and very focused. I mean, John, we work with the National Council, don't we, for in giving support to girls, to women in particular, obviously minority women, but Christian girls in Pakistan. I don't know whether the microphone's on, you could comment on that. And we're about to borrow, you're going to borrow a microphone we're going to have 5 minutes of questions. We said we'd finish in an hour, so I think we just, in case there are any burning questions, and if Patricia's ready just to say something at the end, Patricia Hatton can sort of hover around here and then come up at the end. That's lovely. John, would you like to comment just on what we're trying to do with advancing this a bit more?
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me all right, but...
Maybe a bit closer to you.
Is that any better? Yes, that's better.
Yeah.
So yes, what Neville is alluding to there is Aid to the Church in Need supports a number of programs, not just in Pakistan, but also in Nigeria, that tackle a number of the issues that were outlined by Father Michael as being appropriate by way of addressing the needs on the ground. So especially in Pakistan, we support the National Commission, the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace, which is a body made up of lawyers and of other advocates whose job specifically is to represent the girls, their families in the courts, and to provide that level of legal representation whereby they can overturn instances where clearly a marriage has been undertaken or a forced conversion has been undertaken under false pretenses or on a dubious basis.
Yeah.
Essential to that as well is paralegal support and support for the families, and we are providing the trauma counselling in Nigeria for the likes of Rebecca, and there are many other cases of this. So what we're wanting to do is to draw attention to that work, and we hope very much to expand it.
Yeah, but thank you. I think it's something we could pursue even more. And trauma counselling, just to say, also in the Middle East, we had a model for that in Lebanon, where people came to Lebanon, and people from Iraq and Syria received trauma counselling, and people dealing with those who had suffered in appalling ways. Any questions? You just raise your hand. We have got a roving mic. So just at the front here. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very heartfelt sort of presentation, and for shedding light on the silent cries of these young women and girls, Christians and minorities. John, you mentioned that Facebook had blocked your petition, and in this world of living in social media campaigns, all sorts of, is there any way that you could access that? You know, I'm just thinking of all the big movements that we've had, you know, Me Too and all the rest of it. Is there any way you could, you know, is it just blanket, you know, restriction because it's a Christian cause? Because it's not only a Christian cause, that's the thing.
No, I mean, we don't, just to be clear, we don't know exactly why Facebook have very severely restricted our petition campaign. However, what we do have are examples of the comments. And the comments misrepresent the advertising campaign that we put forward to suggest that it was only mentioning Christians suffering this problem, whereas the adverts make it very clear that it's Christian and other minority women and girls suffering forced abduction, forced conversion, and forced marriage. And we think that there was a deliberate, in some cases, decision or attempt to prevent accurate representation of what we're seeking to do with this campaign. And obviously, as a Catholic charity, we would naturally emphasize the degree to which in certain countries it is Christians who are the main targets of this. And that is definitely the case in parts of Pakistan, in the Punjab province particularly, and also in Nigeria. So in some circumstances, it's very, very much the case that Christians suffer most, and we are hoping very much to continue this petition, because we don't see any real reason why it should have been blocked by Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're facing a different type of censor today, which we have to realise this is not a free zone for expression, and we're facing that, and we're highly restricted to, I think, spending £18 a day on that petition was all that Facebook was allowing us to do. Yes, another question, please. Thank you.
Yes, there's a different type of stories going on in Sri Lanka, especially the Buddhist and Hindus or Muslims who marry into Christian women. They are it's kind of a forcefully stop their children to be Christians or stop being baptized or any sort of they use there's a word they use that we use in the Christian womb to get rid of the invaders. This is a very terrible and it's kind of it's extremely nationalistic approach going there. I think no one really looking into that matters. Intermarriage, Catholic Church in Sri Lanka is allowed, and it's called mixed marriage. The mixed marriage children, there's no place for them to in the church, as well as the church will really, they don't have a problem with that. They would like to accept them, but they forcefully convert into the Buddhism or Hinduism or Muslims.
Thank you. Yeah. So the situation in Sri Lanka, I mean, John's been to Sri Lanka, and I think it's something from what you say, we'll talk more with our priest friends, the sisters, the faithful there, and with yourself indeed, to do a follow-up report on this. But even Sri Lanka, and I was saying to you earlier, those involved in the bombings of the churches that you visited, John, those Easter bombings, the cardinals complained, others, they still have not tried and found anyone guilty. So the situation is politically very complicated. But John, I don't know whether you want to comment very briefly on that before we draw to close. We just want to, we can talk about this after, I'm just aware of time, but thank you. John, just sorry.
Yes, we were in touch with the Archbishop of Colombo, and we're very much aware that a situation of justice has not been reached. And we had a couple of years ago, some of you may remember, we had just after the Easter Day bombings in Colombo and Logombo and elsewhere, we had with us Father Nashate Kure, a priest who ministered to those who were dying after that terrible series of bomb blasts on Easter Day 2019. And he made the same point, that justice had not been served, and we're still very much looking for justice now.
Yeah, awful lot. Good. I know there'll be others who want to ask questions, but you probably would do with a bit of refreshment as well, and maybe warming up. And I could certainly do with putting my coat on. But Patricia's just going to, a bit of a call for action, and I'd just like to say another thank you to you all for being here. Thank you to Patricia Bryony, who is our new events manager, being dropped in the deep end, one event after the other. It's been fantastic. To all the team, to Colette, to John and Finn, to our wonderful speakers as well. Michelle, thank you so much for making the effort with your husband Gary to be here. And also, dear Michael, as a friend, thank you so much. But Patricia, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've got the very pleasant job of closing this evening. And really, firstly, I want to say a huge thank you on Red Wednesday 21. What an amazing turnout. We couldn't have expected on such a cold November evening to see so many people here today. So huge thank you. Red Wednesday started 6 years ago, so I'm just going to show you a very small clip just to see how far we've come. And this is an international clip. I hope you feel inspired seeing that, because this is down to you. See how far we've come in 6 years. Red Wednesday started in the UK. With your support, your encouragement, your prayers, this is now a global campaign. It started in 2021, a week ago, and some of our sister offices focused on what was happening to displaced Christians where there was targeted violence. Huge numbers have no home. Other offices have concentrated on the kidnap and murder of priests and religious. And today in the UK, as you know, we've concentrated on the terrible injustices against women and girls. So this is a huge thank you to you for your continued support. But of course, there's always more that we can do. And so this evening, I just wonder whether you can consider 3 things. Firstly, Myra. We've heard a lot about Myra tonight. Probably no point going through all the horrors again, but she's suffered a huge amount in 2 years alone. ACN is supporting her through advocacy. We're reaching out to her, to the contacts in Pakistan and the UK government to try and make things better for her if we can. But there's so many more Myras out there that need our help. And ACN UK wants to build up this form of work, both the legal aspect of the work, but also what we call the paralegal. That's where, for example, with Myra's family, they can't work, so they need people to bring in food, clothes, all the basics. So I'm going to appeal to your generosity in that if you've been moved by the things that you've heard tonight and would like to contribute specifically to this type of work, we've got many means that you can donate to us. In essence, we've got our gift aid envelopes, the trusty gift aid envelopes. This year, for the first time, on the back of this leaflet, you'll see a QR code. So if any of you have got mobile banking and actually want to make a direct transfer from your phone, you can. And then lastly, if you're at the back at the trading stall and would like to offer a Christmas gift of faith for the Voice for the Voiceless gift, that will directly help this kind of work. So, and also, if you're watching this on catch-up, there's no let-up because we're going to ask you to go to www.acnuk.org/red21. So no excuses. So next, the second thing to consider is the petition. John, you've already heard that we had a bit of a setback with our Facebook campaign because last year at this time, we'd got 12,500 people signed up. So if you haven't already signed up to our petition, please do so, but really need your action to actually go out there and speak to friends, family, parishes, etc., show them the link, get them signing up to get maximum impact before Christmas time. And if you can't do it online, we can also offer you hard copy as well. So the point is, we have a Christian voice, let's use it, let's make people hear us, even if they don't want to hear us. Lastly, through your support over the years, ACN is a trusted partner with other people on this topic of religious freedom. And we do a lot, the team, John's team, John Pontifex, John Newton and Finn Shiner, they do a lot in Parliament to put the cause of Myra and others like her. But actually, wouldn't it be great if we could build a network around the country of really informed advocates, people who really understood the topic of religious freedom and knew how they could use it locally in support of our work. So the way to do this, if you haven't already, please sign up to our e-newsletter. The links are on the screen. And then also, don't forget, if you haven't already got a copy, take your Hear Your Cries report home tonight and read it. What we're hoping to do next year is, over and above the events that we already do, is have some webinars which are about information giving and also a little bit about training. Come and find out about religious freedom. Come learn about it so you can actually speak about it. So those are the three things to take away before we go and sort of socialise on the way out. But lastly, the action that we're asking you to take is not just an intellectual action, it's an action of the heart. And in actual fact, is an action of the Holy Spirit. We need to be courageous in our faith. Occasionally, we need to speak truth to power. And we also need to help our brothers and sisters in Christ who need us now. And that I know you do fulsomely. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming. And I'll hand back to Neville. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask if, I'm sure Father Dominic wouldn't mind if Father Michael gave a blessing, would you? I think that would be lovely. Yes. Don't be...
Seems to be usurping his function.
Well, you know, he's handed over to you. So would you like to stand, and we'll end with a blessing tonight. But thank you so much for being here. Do stop on the way out at the stalls and have some refreshments as well. We really appreciate your support. It's extraordinary. This year, let me tell you, as aid to the church in need internationally, I was at a meeting in Germany recently, and it looks as though we might pay a record amount out in aid. And I've just seen the aid payments coming through, which we were in discussion about from the UK. For this December, there'll be 2 tranches, and it will be pretty much, I think, a record amount of aid we're paying out as well in the UK. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for all you do. It's a great privilege to be involved in this charity, and you are our dear friends and benefactors, and please spread the word. Thank you for being with us. Bishop Michael, thank you.
Well, let us first of all bless God, who's worthy of all blessing, and then we also ask a blessing on those who are this night, this day, experiencing hardship, persecution, rejection because of their faith. And so we pray that Almighty God will bless us in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and all those who follow and love him. Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.